we're going to get going. I'm going to do an introduction here, and then we'll start the webinar and go from there. My name is Fraser Morrison. I'm facilitating and hosting the webinar today. Derek and Gary are both presenting, both from Catchfire. They're both partners within Catchfire. If I start with Derek, he's he specialized M&A with extensive experience helping business owners maximize value and successfully exit their companies. An entrepreneur from the age of 18, he's built and sold his first business before becoming a CPA, CA, and a corporate executive. Today, Derek advises founder-led and mid-market businesses and preparing for sale and increasing enterprise value and achieving successful outcomes through M&A. Gary has decades of experience in business growth, strategy, restructuring, mergers and acquisitions. He now specializes in helping business owners navigate successful exits by providing practical guidance through the entire M&A process. He's also a ICD.D certified corporate director, bringing strong expertise in governance, strategic leadership, and helping entrepreneurs maximize the value of their businesses. Now, before I just the title and the webinar today, I've known Gary and Derek for quite a while. They run a very unique business. I don't know any businesses that I've come across in the last 20 years that have done so many of these for clients. It's really quite fascinating. And the depth of the relationship how they have with their clients is really incredible. And the conversation today, though, did phase me a bit. The ugly baby conversation. I was like, okay, right, that's interesting, but it's a fair point, and I'm sure they're going to explore more about it. But what is your business really worth? We all want to know that, right? We all want to understand what this is about. Yeah. So Gary and Derek, over to you guys, and really looking forward to this personally as well as facilitating. Cool.
Thanks so much, Fraser, and good morning, everyone. Before we get started, I would just like to introduce Catchfire a little bit for those who aren't familiar with us. We started Catchfire about 10 years ago because we found an underserviced segment of the market and wanted to provide service to mid-market companies, owner-operated companies, primarily who were preparing for or ready to execute an exit from their business. And that has become the focus of what we do. We do buy-side, sell-side representation, and we do a lot of work starting the relationship in advance to prepare companies to go to market when the time is right. I wouldn't mind starting by explaining the audacious title, why we call it the ugly baby conversation. And, it's obviously a little tongue-in-cheek. Comes from this belief that, just like every parent believes their kid is very special, very beautiful, very talented, very unique. Most of our kids probably fall somewhere in the ordinary category, somewhere in the bell curve. And it's the same with business owners. It's very common that business owners see their businesses as very special and very unique and having this exceptional value that doesn't always meet with the reality of the market when they go to sell it. So just like it's hard to have a conversation with a parent to tell them that their kid isn't so special, it's a difficult conversation sometimes to have with owners of businesses of why their businesses aren't, as special as they might think they are. So what we want to do today is kind of identify where that gap comes from and offer some suggestions about what owner operators could do in preparing their business to sale to try and narrow that gap.
Yeah, and I just add, Gary, that we're not here to tell owners their business isn't good. It's about understanding, like you just said, why buyers see things differently. Okay, so the reality, I would say, Gary, 99 times out of 100, if we can use that, because I think we've been through over 100 transactions combined together. The reality is the seller's value never equals the buyer's value. We had a client, he had built his company for 35 years, or 25 years, long hours, risk taken, making his mortgage payments, taking no vacations. He thought he deserved a premium on his business. And what happened there, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard for a buyer to put any value on on that? How do you quantify that and how do you measure it unless somehow it's translated into the success of the business?
Yeah, and like the buyers never ask that, they don't talk about, the blood, sweat, and tears. They talk about one question. What happens when you leave? What are we going to do? We want to know that you have the ability this business has the ability to run when the owner is leaving. You want to know that this business can generate future cash flow. We want to know that it's risk based. We want to know that we're going to get a good return on our investment.
Yeah, and rightfully so. The owner of the business has a lot of pride in what they've built and what they've accomplished over many years. And sometimes that pride doesn't align with the more, Spock-like analytical approach that a buyer might take in assessing the value of the business.
Yeah, it's always the toughest conversation, but as we go through our webinar today, we hope that we can close that gap for the sellers.
So the three biggest value gaps that we see are, buyers buyers are trying to mitigate the risk when they're buying a business. And so they will look at future growth opportunities of the business. And not just, we joke that every entrepreneur believes that next year will be the best year ever, but they'll do their own assessment. Where's the industry? Where's the market? Where are we in the cycles? What are the growth opportunities? What's our, defendable competitive position? The one that I mentioned just a minute ago, the whole emotional value, right? That the current owner, the seller of the business, has rightfully so a lot of pride, a lot of emotional investment, and it's selling a business sometimes can be like putting one of your kids up for adoption. That there's a real emotional piece to it. And when we take on a client, just as an aside, we always look for what I call the alignment between the head and the heart, right? Their brain sometimes tell them it's time to sell the business, but their heart is still heavily invested in it, and sometimes that can make a sale difficult. And then the third one is the whole understanding of market multiples and what the owner is expecting versus what the market is actually paying. We'll get into that a little more in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, and then just to point out, like, there's other gaps that we see, but everything that we see in transactions comes back to one of these three gaps. And it's really important for sellers or future sellers to know that buyers value their value based on past performance, but buy based on expected future performance. So when we think about what I just said there, buyers are buying on the future. We have, kind of the three kind of areas of the cycle. It's the past, the present, and the future. The sellers are always looking, present and back, and the buyers are always looking at the future. And it's not about that the buyers don't see value in the past. I mean, that obviously sets the foundation. But they really want to know the questions like, can revenue grow? Can we improve margins? Is there some component of recurring revenue? We worked with a company a few years ago that had produced over $1 million of EBITDA for several years. We're going through the process. We're kind of partway through the current fiscal year at that time, and all of a sudden sales started dropping and profitability started dropping, and the conversation became a lot more difficult. And the seller said, "But look what we've done historically," and the buyer said, "We're buying the next 5 years, not the last 5 years. We appreciate that you've done all this work." So past performance matters, but only because it predicts the future performance. So Gary, like, what do you think are the top, areas of importance when the buyers are coming in and looking at the future?
Yeah, so some of the things touched on in this slide. I mean, is there not just an opportunity to grow, but is there a clear path to growth? Not speculative growth like, oh wow, we're hoping for a really good year, but what does that look like and given the market conditions? And we'll talk later a little bit about risk, but the more certainty a buyer has about these points, the more comfortable they'll be in acquiring the business and, paying what we'll call fair market value to it. Recurring revenue that you touch on there is very attractive to buyers for the simple reason that it de-risks future sales. That if you've got this built-in recurring revenue model, and examples are business services. Are you selling insurance or burglar alarms or parking lot maintenance, snow clearing, landscaping, where every month, you're providing a service and getting a check and you're locking clients into to a recurring revenue model. Scalability is always important. Young legs or a new buyer comes into a business. Often they will look for not just organic growth, but how can I really kick this up a notch? Can I take a $10 million business and make it into a $50 million business?
Yeah, it's perfect. And like just kind of touching on the recurring revenue, it doesn't have to be, there's a lot of chatter out there in the M&A world about subscriptions and stuff such. And we've done several transactions where it's about long-standing customer relationships. And we'll get into that a bit later about the importance of who built those relationships, but it's not just having a subscription revenue base in place. Recurring
Yeah,
revenue can
customer stickiness, right?
customer stickiness, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Um, so some of these points we've touched on already, the emotional equity and how difficult it is for the buyer to put any price or value on that. In an earlier discussion, Derek raised the point that they've taken a lot of that equity out already, like that investment of missing birthday parties and sweating about making payroll is how they built the business, and they've generated presumably an income and some returns over the years, and taken some dividends out. So some of that value has already been realized, but again, it's very difficult for the buyer to assign a dollar value to that. They're going to do their own assessment of risk and predictability. And they are going to look at what will happen to this business after they buy it. So return on investment.
Yeah, and when we think about this emotional equity, Gary, like the owner has been in business for 20, 25, 30, 35 years. It's had its up, the business has had its ups and downs, but mostly ups because it's survived that long, which is a success in itself. And really what you're looking at there, it's, whatever their profit is, $1 million, $2 million, they've been, I would say, reaping those rewards. And then when it comes time, and let's just say the business to sell, and the business has, $2 million of EBITDA, and they come back and say, why am I only getting 8 million or 10 million for this thing? I've been doing this for 40 years. They forget about the $40 million that they made over the 40 years, over the past. So it's really important for them to know that, you've built off this. This is the foundation for you to pass this on to the successor.
Yeah, and it's not to undervalue the seriousness or the importance of that emotional investment. We sold a business, Derek, you might remember a few years ago. It was a third generation, 105-year-old family business. Grandpa started it and dad ran it. And the gentleman who was selling the business was at that, when we sold it, was 73. He had been running the business since he was 33, but he grew up in that business and he had pictures on the wall of, him and grandpa when the current owner, the one we worked with, was 11 years old, and grandpa was teaching him how to make parts out of scrap metal in the factories so that, to reduce the waste. So literally, this man had grown up in the business, had spent 7 days a week there for 40 years, other than a month in the winter when he'd go away and phone every day, 7 days a week, to see what was going on. And so when he was selling the business and taking pictures off the wall from 65 years earlier with his grandfather, the emotional wave that, of I'll call it the sobriety of the moment, really took over and made him question his decision about whether he was really ready to sell or not. So it's deeply held, those emotions.
Yeah. So gap three, Gary, market
Our favorite
multiples.
one.
Oh yeah, it's always a hot topic. In fact, we were just on a call yesterday. We're talking to a prospective buyer of one of our businesses, and the first question out of her mouth was, "What's the multiple they expect for it?" And of course, what do we usually say? It's Gary. What do we say? We say,
20. Every buyer wants 20 times, or every seller wants 20 times.
yeah, yeah. And of course, like we always hate going to market with multiples, but that's a whole nother topic. But the biggest thing we hear from a lot of our clients is things like, I heard companies like mine are selling for 8x, or I was at a conference and this guy was up on stage and he told us he sold his business for 15x. And these prospective clients of ours and clients are coming to us and telling us these stories, and you have to give them a little bit of a reality check. There's lots of implications. I mean, specifically, Gary and I were at a conference a few years ago, and there was an individual up on the stage. He was on a panel and talking about the success of his business, and it was a huge, huge success business, and talking about the multiples. And he brought up getting 12x for his business. And one of our clients came to us after the conference and said, "Hey, Gary and Derek, why am I only getting like 4 or 5x for my business? Why are you thinking that? And this guy's getting 12x." And you have to give them the reality check. Like, there's lots of different aspects and conflicts there. Like, this particular individual was in a really, really sexy industry, and it's what that market was willing to pay for at that time. But there's other components in there that come in, like size and growth and risk, your customer mix, et cetera. And those all influence multiples. It's not, you just don't go to the market and say, "I'm going to get 6x for my business." It's all based on what the buyers and the markets are currently looking at right now.
Yeah, it's kind of like lottery tickets, right? You always hear about the people who win 60, 70 million dollars, but those are rare stories to get really strong numbers like that in the mid-market for businesses of that size.
Yeah. Okay.
So where do the when we talk about multipliers or multiples, what we're really talking about is, a risk assessment that a buyer will put in their calculations when they're putting an offer together or some pricing together, what a value together. And, this little formula really sums it up, that the value of the business will be your cash flow plus what they will see as defined growth opportunities, adjusted for risk. And how that translates into multiples is, the first rule in business, or one of the first rules, high risk, high return. So if I see your business as really high risk, I might pay 1x EBITDA, which, I mean, it would never happen, but it's an example that says I want my investment out in 1 year because I see big risk attached to this. Whereas, if I was buying the Royal Bank of Canada, I might be happy to get my investment out in 40 years because it's pretty solid and pretty guaranteed low risk, right? And so I would pay a higher multiple for a low risk business. So those are two extreme examples, but just to illustrate that the risk adjustment, in fact, the multiple is, is the reflection of the buyer's determination of the risk level of the deal. Right?
Yeah,
Higher multiple, lower risk, lower multiple, higher risk.
yeah, exactly, Gary. That's a great point. So, Gary, in all our experience, we have a list of five kind of key areas that scare buyers here on the screen right now. What do you think is the scariest, if any?
Well, all of them, but the top one, owner dependency in mid-market businesses, is very concerning for a buyer, because when the owner walks out the door, if all the relationships and the business knowledge walks out the door, what is the buyer really buying. And, there's a bit of a paradox because that skill set that allowed that owner to either start or grow the business over the years often is driven by their ability to develop strong relationships with clients. But eventually, if those relationships don't belong to the company and they remain, I'll call it the property of the owner, that's really scary for a buyer to think that all the customers might leave if the owner leaves, or a big chunk of them.
Yeah.
What do you think
And
is the
well,
biggest risk?
I was actually gonna say the same thing as you is like I think it's all of them. I mean, you can't, they're almost kind of inextricably linked. I mean, if you have owner dependency, you're likely not going to have strong management, or at least they're not going to be perceived as strong. But like just even thinking about owner dependency in general, Gary, you can still sell your business if the business is dependent on it. But the big kicker there is the buyer is going to want the owner to stay on for a longer period of time. So if you've been working on working at your business for, 40 plus years and you want to retire the next day, but everything relies on you, like if you're the guy that's going out there and approving all the invoices, you're the person that has all the customer relationships. Um, the buyer's not going to let you want you to go, and is certainly not going to pay for it for you to go. So you're going to be on the hook for another 3 years, probably, maybe even longer, depending on how quickly things can transition over. So I would probably agree if I had to pick one, it was owner dependency, but they're all really important.
Well, and I think we should talk about customer concentration just for a minute because it crops up a lot. And you'll recall we had a client a few years ago, and at that time, about 40% of their business came from one customer. And why would that make a buyer nervous? Because if you lose that customer, the business takes a real hit. It changes the valuation. And then the client did not end up selling their business at that time for a variety of reasons. We'll talk about another time. But about 5 or 6 years later, they called us back because they had changed their mind and now they really wanted to sell their business. And when we looked at it, they had doubled their sales. It was fantastic what they had done in a short period of time, very aggressive growth. However, the reliance on that one customer had gone from 40% to about 65%. And so even though the business top line was double, some of the other factors in here, including the net earnings and the debt level, but in particular, the customer concentration just scared away any prospective buyers.
Yeah, yeah. The biggest risk there in that case was what happens if the customer leaves? What does that do to the business? And that the owner just couldn't get their heads wrapped around that whole in my mind, that customer concentration issue. Big one. Um, Quality or consistency of earnings, Gary, we've seen a few of those, both, good and bad. We had one client where it was like they had an annuity, they were making, $2-3 million year after year after year. Buyers love that kind of stuff and pay for it. And we had another client where, was making 2 million one year and zero the next year and 1 million the following year. I mean, it was up and down. And so, having predictability and sustainable profitability is extremely important in getting your business on the market and sold quickly and at a premium.
Well, Derek, if I can add that first client you referred to, a manufacturing business got 6 times their EBITDA when they sold it because of that consistency and predictability of earnings, and also there was no management depend or no owner dependency. The owner was really detached from the day-to-day operation of the business, so it helped them get a pretty strong multiple. I wanted to, before we move on, the point about financial reporting, and I'll let you tell the story of what happened last summer with a huge deal that we were working on. But before you do, I'll just say that um, having how do I want to say this? People aren't always aware of the quality of the reporting that they're getting in their businesses. And I think an investment up front in making sure that you've got timely and accurate reporting systems in place will pay off down the road. Derek, do you want to share that story from last summer?
Yeah, yeah, we had a great business, significantly profitable. Um, found a buyer, was paying a premium. In fact, premium was like 10, it was a 10x multiple actually, because it was in a very, very sexy industry, and everything looked great. Um, just to give you a bit of context, the company had a number of businesses that had purchased over several years, and they weren't all integrated. And so the owner at the time was consolidating the financials, and that was what was being used to present. And then when the buyer came in and started doing their due diligence, they found a pretty significant reporting error in one of the one of the businesses that were purchased that were being rolled up into the company. And it wasn't that the multiple was an issue at that point, but basically that had a huge impact on the profitability of the business at that time, and on the integrity of how this company was reporting. So it went from not a 10x multiple, but the profitability was basically adjusted so much, or normalized, I guess we'll say that, that it ended up being a reduction of 40%. And the client at that point basically said, well, we got to walk away. Our business is worth way more than that, and we're going to have to readjust. So again, in the end, it's probably not going to be a big deal if they have a great business, and they'll fix it. And down the road, they'll be able to get back to the number they were at, but it's just timing of not being able to sell it at that time with the right buyer in place. So
Right.
I guess yeah, the theme here is the higher the risk, the lower the value. So if you don't want to fix these issues up front, then this is what's going to happen.
Derek, I use the analogy of selling a house. And some people keep their homes, kind of in, I'll call it tip-top condition and ready for that knock on the door. Or if there's a life event that causes them to want to sell it, they're ready to go. And other people don't maintain their house to that level. And so a new buyer coming in will adjust the price for the amount of additional investment they're going to have to make to bring that house up to standards. It's kind of the same with your business, that the more ongoing investment, or the higher the risk of future investment, the less they're going to pay for the business up front.
Yeah.
So what happens if that gap isn't closed, right? And you can see on the left side of the page, the first one, which we've spoken about a couple of times, is they're just gonna, if they still want to go ahead, they're going to offer a lower price. Or what we're seeing more and more of, and we use it as a tool really to often bridge the gap, is performance-based payments, contingency payments, earnouts, deferred payments. So we have a client that we've just finished a deal with, whereby the seller wanted a certain price and the buyer was offering a certain price, and there was a gap. And the seller was very bullish that, this year is going to be the best year ever, and we're going to make a boatload of money, and we think we deserve this, the higher price. And the seller was saying, well, of course they're going to say that, but how do we know if that's going to materialize? And so we bridge that gap by saying there's a performance-based piece to the purchase price. If the seller hits their numbers, then they get the extra money, and if they don't, then the buyer doesn't pay for something that doesn't materialize. So we're seeing more of that. And then again, the larger that gap is, or the perceived risk, the more the buyer is going to be able to dictate the terms. The seller may not have as many options as they would otherwise. And in a worst case scenario, it might be the gap is so huge that the business just can't be sold, that the buyer's expectations and the seller's expectations are too far apart to bridge the gap.
Yeah, and really, I guess we're not saying that if you don't close the gap, you're not going to be able to sell your business necessarily, but your expectations need to be reset if that's the case, if you want to sell your business. But so I guess the bright point here though, Gary, is the gap can be closed. And our our approach to the market is you should always be prepared to sell your business, even if you've only 5 years in, or if you're 20 years in, you should always be prepared. And Gary, I guess, our clients always ask us, when should we start? And what do we usually say?
Well, you know my line. There's an old saying that says the best time to plant an oak tree was 50 years ago, and the second best time is today. And the earlier you start the planning, we will help you, or you on your own can improve your business performance, make sure that it's transferable to a new buyer, make sure you're prepared from a personal perspective, both psychologically, but also for tax efficiency, that when you sell the business, there are ways of structuring the ownership that you can reduce your tax hit, but those all have to be planned and implemented well in advance of the sale.
Yeah. So when we think about like, these pillars on the right-hand side of the screen here, prepare, professionalize, improve, it's really about, preparation starts years before the sale. And one, I would argue to Gary that you should be starting from day one. That obviously doesn't always happen because that's what makes the entrepreneur. It's, shoot from the hip a bit at the beginning. But eventually you want to make sure that you're structured properly, whether it's tax efficiency, whether you got your good management team in place. So preparing is absolutely key. We talked about those what scares the buyers, reducing owner dependency, strengthening your management team, diversifying customers. You should be thinking about those at all the time because you never know when the time's going to come that you want to sell your business. When we talk
Well,
about, oh, go ahead,
sorry.
go ahead.
I
Yeah,
was going to say maybe we can wrap up with one quick story. A number of years ago, we had to have a conversation with a seller who had a number in mind that he wanted for his business, and he wanted to make sure that he and his family would be financially secure for the rest of time. And when we first met him, we recognized that the business was worth considerably less than what his number was, and that he wasn't going to be able to achieve his goal. And so we worked with that client for a couple of years, got very operationally involved, first a little bit, and then the relationship grew over time to the point that we were in there practically running their company alongside the CEO. But at the end of the day, we were able to get more than almost four times what the original value was when we first met him. And we were able to exceed what his minimum threshold was. But when we met him, the business did not have good systems in place. They weren't hitting their margins. The owner was not prepared for tax efficiency when he sold the business. By the time we sold it, he was able to get his more than his price and do it in a very, very tax efficient way.
yeah, that was one of the biggest success stories of like, using your analogy about planting the oak tree 50 years ago or today. I mean, we basically started today in that case in that company, and within 18 months, we had that business turned around and sold for what the client wanted for it. But it was a lot of work to get up to that point to close that gap. Okay, the ugly baby test, Gary.
So
What
how do
should
you
be?
know how beautiful your baby is?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
hope everyone takes it with the humor that's intended. Your babies aren't really ugly.
yeah. So, like, look, these are just straightforward questions every owner, operator, entrepreneur should be asking themselves is, could the business operate without me? Um, are my financial statements buyer ready? Like, you can't be going into due diligence with prospective buyers and they're asking for monthly financial statements for the last 4 months or 6 months, and you come back to them and say, we haven't done our financials for 8 months. You have to be on top of things. Um, who has the relationship with the customers, Gary? That's hugely important. You alluded to that earlier, the customer stickiness. Um, EBITDA, everybody here is normalized EBITDA, normalized EBITDA. I mean, obviously there's going to be some one-time adjustments, but you want to have as few adjustments as possible at that time, on the EBITDA numbers, so it doesn't create any uncertainty with the buyer. Gary, like what else do you think is there that people
I
should
would
be?
add one more that's not on there, and that's the stickiness of the existing staff and management, right? Are they, again, what's their runway like post-transaction?
Mhm.
Businesses are people, and if I'm buying the business, if we've seen situations where there's a lot of family presence in the business, and five, six family members in senior leadership roles, And when the business gets sold, are they sticking around? Are they leaving with the business? Or if your management has been with you for as long as you've had the company, 30 or 40 years, will they see this as an opportunity to retire? So a buyer wants to know that there's going to be consistency in the staffing of the business.
Yeah. So like we're saying here, like if you're answering no to any of these, you should be really taking a step back and looking at what you can do to close that gap before going to the market. And like at the bottom of the page here, businesses are bought not because they're successful, but because they're transferable. It's absolutely key. I mean, um, if the gap's not closed, is it not transferable? I would say, it's going to be a bit more difficult, but ideally we want to close those gaps and get prepared for selling the business.
And Derek, let me close with a little bit of a commercial. I mean, our policy is everybody gets an hour is kind of how I like to say it, that if you have questions about the potential future or present sale of your business, we'll meet with you and we'll have a conversation, no cost, no strings attached, and we'll better introduce ourselves and yourselves. And we'll start that conversation toward an ultimate sale. And so anybody who's here that wants to have those follow-up conversations, our contact information is here, and we're happy to connect at any time.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate there, like our goal was not to convince you that you should be selling your business. Goal is to help you understand what buyers eventually see when you do. And yeah, we'd happy to have a confidential conversation at any time, and appreciate all your time.
Okay, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up. It was
Yeah.
a really good session. I really enjoyed it, and I think everybody enjoyed it. Maybe if you just want to add a quick note there, one of you, and then we'll call it a day. And we'll be running other webinars like this on, as you've said, on the topic. So we'll keep you all in the loop and get you along. We'll also be sharing a video of the webinar. Are we sharing the deck? You're sharing the deck, yes?
Yeah.
We'll share the
We can
deck.
share that.
Yeah, perfect. And if you've got any questions, really feel free to reach out. So, Gary or Derek, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, I would just say, oh, go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
said, call us.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, but I was going to say if today's discussions raised any questions about what your business might be worth, then, or what you can do to improve the value, then give us a call. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, perfect. There you go. Excellent. So thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everybody.
Really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
Very
Okay.
insightful. And look forward to the next one. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye.